What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back for still not the season review because the Kraken just keep doing things. This time, firing head coach Dave Hakstol as the post-Hakstol era has officially begun. It's a big move from the Kraken that, while I certainly did recognize it was a possibility given how the season went for them and the disappointing end to it, I didn't really see them making this move in the offseason. I saw it as more of something that if they were getting close to making the move, then maybe Hakstol starts the season on a bit of a warm seat. And if things continue to not go well through the first month or two of next season, then maybe they make that change to try to get things going again. So I guess I'd say I'm surprised but not shocked at the news. I don't know, I guess that I thought that the way that last season went, the second year, the incredible run, 100 points, making the playoffs, getting to the second round, game 7 of the second round, would have bought Hakstol a little bit more of a leash than a disappointing season, but still just 1 point off of NHL 500, getting him sent out the door just a year after they extended his contract. In the end, though, obviously somebody in the front office, whether that was Ron Francis himself or maybe somebody above him, felt that now was the time, enough was enough, and a change needed to be made. And I suppose if a change did ultimately need to be made, it's better that it happens now so that a new head coach can come in, get used to the organization, and fully be able to get set up and set up his scheme in the preseason and training camp rather than trying to make it all happen on the fly during the middle of the season, if that had ended up needing to be the way things had gone. Regardless of all that, though, and the circumstances around this parting of ways, Hakstol leaves the Kraken after having coached the team for the first 3 years of their existence, in which they went 107, 112, and 27 for 241 points in 246 games. So just 5 points short of NHL 500, which, given how the inaugural season went, is actually pretty good over these last 2 years, even with the slightly disappointing year this year. Which, obviously then, by process of elimination, is thanks to that great second season for the Kraken, in which they got 100 points, got their first ever franchise playoff appearance in the first round, defeating the defending champs in 7 games, and then taking the Stars all the way to 7 games in the second round, losing that by just a single goal. A season for the Kraken that, even if it was slightly overachieving, was a truly incredible one, not just in the scope of what the Kraken have been able to do, but it was the best second season by any team ever in the history of the NHL. So then to have a slightly disappointing year this year, where again, they're just 1 point shy of NHL 500, and yeah, the way things shook out this year, that does mean that they get a top 10 pick. Again, to me, that's where this seems a little bit of a hasty move, but we can get to my opinion on this in just a second here. As for Hakstol and his system and how the Kraken played under it over the course of the 3 years, and we'll see a little bit more in this in the season recap, which will be the next video I have out, unless the Kraken make some other massive news announcement in the next day or two, but we might as well take a quick look at it here anyway, because it is Hakstol's system that focused largely on defense, which is a large part of what got him hired in the first place. So when it comes to whoever the Kraken hire next, I wouldn't expect that the focus of defense first to change too much. Either way, under Hakstol, that is somewhere the Kraken really excelled, at least when it came to shot quantity suppression, as they were able to be one of the top 10 teams in the NHL in all 3 seasons when it came to shots allowed against. In the first season, they were 4th best in shots allowed per game, as well as expected goals at 5-on-5. The following season, 2nd best in both of those categories. And now this season, while they did give up more shots than they'd given up in either of the previous years, they were still top 10, finishing 8th in shots against per game, but were giving up even less as far as quality shots were concerned, as they finished 3rd in expected goals at 5-on-5 against per game. Now, again, for those of us that actually watched the games, especially in that inaugural season, there's still a discussion to be had about the quality of shots that the Kraken were allowing being a lot more than necessarily the stats would suggest. A lot of breakaways, odd man opportunities, that when the Kraken defense did surrender chances, they tended to be a lot more dangerous than other teams might give up. Though even with that, I will say it was mostly just an issue consistently in the inaugural season, really was cleaned up pretty well the second year, and was kind of spotty. It showed up here and there this season, unfortunately showing up the most when things weren't going well for the team and they were pressing a little bit too hard and making sloppy, undisciplined mistakes. So yeah, it really reared its head mostly during the big losing streaks or when they got behind by a couple of goals during games. But anyway, even with all that, the Kraken were still, under Hakstol, a very solid defensive team, one of the NHL's best defensive teams over these last 3 years. Unfortunately, on the other side of the ice, things were, at the very least, much less consistent, and ultimately the downfall of Hakstol with the Kraken, as well as the 23-24 Kraken, and again, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail in the season recap, was the offense, as the team did kind of regress to back more what they had been during the inaugural year, where they just had a hard time scoring goals consistently. A team that had put up a fourth most in the NHL goals per game the season prior just fell off the face of the earth offensively this season, way back down towards the bottom of the NHL. And a large part of that is the shooting percentage, so puck luck certainly wasn't on their side this season, where it definitely had been the previous year. A shooting percentage dropping 3 points, though, is not all explained by bad luck. Unfortunately for Hakstol, personnel is certainly a part of it. The Kraken don't have a true superstar offensively, at least not yet anyway. Both Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, and who knows about some of the other prospects that have been lighting up the juniors, could potentially turn into that down the road, but it's certainly still at least a couple years away at best. And as for the rest, well, there's only so much Ron Francis can do. The superstar players just aren't available all that often. Sure, Vegas did trade their way into Eichel, but those were pretty unique circumstances in the first place, and just not the type of thing that's going to be available to you very frequently, especially with the NHL having been under the flat cap over the last few years and all the stuff that's gone on with that. Ultimately, though, the biggest problem, and it is what Ron Francis specifically pointed to, was the consistency of this team, which was certainly lacking this season. They'd go through stretches where they looked like last year's team, scoring 3, 4, 5 goals a game. They rattled off 9 straight wins at one point, but then at the same time, they also had the 2 long 8-game losing streaks, the first of which put them in a place where they needed the long winning streak in order to get back in the season, and the second one kind of killed the season. Not kind of, it did kill the season for the Kraken, and it's that consistency that, while you can explain a lot of the personnel stuff is really not being on the coaching whatsoever. I mean, personnel isn't on the coaching whatsoever. I suppose how you deploy that personnel is, and maybe there's some issues with that, but I don't really think a ton of that this season. I think Hakstol really did the best with what he was given as far as who was on the ice and when. But the consistency, that does come down to leadership, and Hakstol is the leader in the locker room. So when you have a team that just doesn't look like the same team from week to week, something clearly needs to change, and the players are under contract, so ultimately it's the coach who is the easiest to get rid of and make the change there. Anyway, as for my thoughts on this move by the Kraken, as I kind of just said, I do think it was a little bit on the hasty side for them to make this move now rather than give Hakstol, as I probably would have, at least the start of next year, and then maybe if things are still not going well, then you know what you have and you make the move then. We've seen it work for teams before to make that move mid-season, have things turn around immediately. Yeah, like I said in the beginning, it is better if you're going to make the move and you know that the move needs to be made to make it in the offseason, so you have that offseason to get a new coach and a new system set up to go into the season. Still, I think that Hakstol probably earned enough with that 100-point season and being a finalist for the Jack Adams, the Coach of the Year. I probably should have earned him a little bit more than getting shown the door after a middling, disappointing, but middling season. But just because it's not the move, or at least the timing of the move that I would have made, doesn't mean that I hate it either. Again, there's a lot of good reasoning behind why you would make it right now if you were going to make it anyway. The one part of it that has me a little bit concerned is it kind of smells like upper management interference and ownership interference. And that's just not something that I really like to see in a franchise. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but the vibe that I got was very much that Hakstol and Ron Francis were on the same page. And while Francis definitely did see this as a disappointing season, it seemed like he was on board with keeping Hakstol around for at least another season, or at least the start of it anyway. And of course, things could have changed in the whole discussions that they do after the season is done. You never really know. But at least from the outside, it does kind of seem like this might have been something where ownership, who has not been happy with how things like season ticket sales have gone, the gate revenue that was coming in at the end of the season, and obviously that hasn't been helped out by the whole Root Sports situation, which they have also fixed. It kind of feels like this might have been a move where ownership wanted something to change, and this was the easiest thing to change to try to get back in the playoffs last year after they got the taste of all of that delicious playoff money and attention last season. Now, with that said, generally, I think this ownership group has done a fantastic job to this point, not only with the arena, the branding, pretty much everything with this team, outside of picking Root Sports as their exclusive broadcasting partner for the first 3 years when they really should have had at least some sort of streaming deal as a secondary option from the get-go. It definitely would have helped get a little bit more, well, take advantage of that initial interest in that inaugural season, but we've already talked about that. As far as the on-ice product is concerned, I think ownership has done a good job. They're clearly invested in the team and the team's success, which is more than you can say about, I don't know, the Mariners, for example. But at the same time, you really don't want an ownership group that is so invested that they start going, I shouldn't say over the head, they're already over the head of the GM, but they start making the decisions of the GM and the people that they hired to make those decisions. We've seen it plague the Cowboys in the NFL for years, where Jerry Jones just thinks that he can make all decisions and make the team good. And well, it works every now and then in the regular season. They fall apart in the playoffs, and yeah, that's just not something that I'm terribly interested in seeing with the Kraken. At least to me anyway, what you ideally want from an owner or an ownership group is for them to be very invested in the team and their success, but to show that through funding things that set them up for that success, like letting them spend to a salary cap if there is one, which this ownership group has done so far and says they continue to do. Again, something Paul Allen did. And then beyond the salary cap, spending money in all the other areas that aren't governed by a CBA or anything like that. Building a world-class training facility and staffing it with world-class trainers, coaches, and all sorts of other chefs and that kind of stuff that can give your organization that extra leg up on the rest if, say, a free agent is looking around and you're going to treat them better than any other franchise out there. Heck, never mind attracting free agents, just keeping the players that you have around and not allowing them to look elsewhere to teams that might potentially treat them better. And of course, part of hiring that great staff is hiring a front office and a general manager that can make all the player decisions and coaching decisions to put the best possible team on the ice. And not trying to do that part yourself, because as a billionaire, you probably don't know better than somebody that's been doing it for a living, like Ron Francis, for example. Now, again, to be clear, I'm not saying that's what happened here. This very well could have been just Ron Francis' decision all by himself without anybody suggesting that he make these moves. Again, it's not a decision that doesn't make sense when it happened. Even if it is a little bit surprising, it's not shocking, and I know there are plenty of people, and there will be some in the comments, that were ready for this to happen, well, all the way back in the inaugural season, but once again ready for it to happen towards the end of this year when it was becoming clear that they weren't going to make the playoffs, and especially during that last long losing streak. As always, though, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below, what you thought of this move by the Kraken, who maybe you think the Kraken could pick up next. That's something else that I didn't really talk about much, partially because I don't know that there's a ton of point in doing it. The coaching carousel is just getting going, so if the Kraken potentially did see somebody get fired that they like for the potential head coach job, maybe that's a reason that they made this move now rather than waiting towards next season. If there's somebody available that they really wanted to start getting that interview process going, who knows if that's the case. Maybe there's somebody within the organization that hasn't had a head coaching job yet in the NHL, or maybe somebody like Coach Lowry who has tried coaching in the NHL, but not a ton. Yeah, it's really hard to say. Let me know what you think down in the comment section, who you'd like to see be the next head coach of the Kraken, whether they're available or not, I suppose, if they're potentially going to be available. Next video out will be that season recap. I did think about doing the season recap with this video, but I felt like it would be best to just separate the two and then spend a little bit more time on each. With that, though, until that video, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.